Today we're going to be going over the installation of the Texas Tough Customs lift kit for your Honda Pioneer. Whether you're looking for increased ground clearance for trail riding and obstacles, or a more smooth and stable ride, or just increased quality components, the Texas Tough Customs kit is right for you. The kits are available in either a 0, 3, or 6-inch lift kit, depending on your needs. Now, what's great is that all of the lift kits install very similar. However, it is recommended to go to the webpage and get the most current, up-to-date instructions. That will be your master reference for the installation process. In this video, we're going to be installing the 3-inch lift kit, and this is meant to be a visual reference or guide to go along with those instructions when you install the kit on your machine. A couple of helpful tips for the installation. Number 1, it doesn't hurt to have an extra set of hands, especially if that extra set of hands has a little bit of automotive or ATV mechanical background. Having an extra set of hands to install various components was something that came in handy for my installation. Number 2, set aside a few hours for this project. While it's relatively simple, it will take some time, and having the proper tools makes the job so much easier. Last, the rear of the installation is a little simpler, so do that first to build your confidence before you move on to the front of the machine. If any part of the installation process, whether shown in this video or in the instructions, doesn't make sense to you, or you don't feel comfortable performing the installation, don't hesitate to reach out to Jared. His contact information is on the webpage or in the instructions, or have a qualified mechanic perform the installation for you.
Remove all of the packaging material and lay out all of the parts. You should have the front and rear components, and then within those, the left and right side of those particular arms. Make sure that you lay them out in the proper orientation so that installation is easier once you begin assembly. This project is best done in a clean, well-lit area. This helps keep things organized. You will need a variety of tools and supplies needed for the installation. You will need a variety of wrenches, both standard and metric, various sockets and ratchets, a soft hammer, a variety of pliers, and a large adjustable wrench. A small impact driver can also be handy for various parts of the installation process. Supplies needed include some red or high heat thread locking compound and a ratchet strap. You will also need a jack, and it is recommended to use jack stands. Beginning with the rear, jack up the machine and then secure with jack stands. Remove the rear wheels and set aside. Now remove the bolts, securing the brake lines to the upper control arm. Loosen the two 12mm frame bolts and nuts that secure the upper control arm to the frame. However, leave the bolts in place. Next, loosen the outer 10 by 120mm bolt holding the hub assembly onto the upper control arm and remove the bolt. You will not reuse this nut or bolt. Remove the two inner 12mm frame bolts and remove the stock upper control arm. Loosen the two 12mm frame bolts and nuts that secure the lower control arm to the frame. However, leave the bolts in place. Then, loosen the outer 10 by 153mm bolt holding the hub assembly to the lower control arm and remove the bolt. You will reuse both the nut and bolt, so set aside. Next, remove the lower shock mount bolt and secure the shock up and out of the way with a tie strap or bungee. Remove the hardware securing the sway bar to the lower control arm and from the frame. Then you can remove the sway bar from the machine itself. The hardware needs to be removed from both sides of the machine in order to remove the sway bar. Next, remove the lower control arm from the hub assembly and remove the lower control arm from the machine. Locate the lower control arm for the side of the machine that you are working on. Note that orientation is important. The shock tabs are closer to the front of the machine as shown on the screen diagram. Install the lower control arm into the lower frame mount using the two factory 12mm bolts and nuts. Snug the nuts, but do not tighten. Next, install the rear hub assembly into the lower control arm using the factory lower 10mm bolt. Install the shock into the lower arm, securing it with the stock 12mm bolt and nut. Now locate the rear upper control arms. They are both exactly the same and can be used on either side. Install the upper control arm into the upper frame mounts using the factory 12mm bolts and nuts. Snug up the nuts, but do not tighten. Remove the pre-installed 10mm bolt supplied with the rear upper arms. Careful not to lose the aluminum spacers resting in the joints. Line up the heim joints with the top of the hub assembly, and if necessary, use a mallet to help slide them into place so that the supplied upper hub bolt can be installed. Once everything is assembled hand tight, go ahead and fully tighten both the upper and lower frame bolts that mount the control arms to the frame. Route and secure the brake line as desired and secure with zip ties. You can now complete the installation on the other side of the machine using the same directions. Reinstall the wheels, remove the jack stands, and lower the machine. Now we're going to move to the front of the machine. Securely jack up the machine, and it is recommended to use jack stands. Remove the front wheels. Remove the bolts securing the brake lines to the upper control arm. Remove the cotter pin and loosen the nut on the factory outer tie rod. Free the outer tie rod from the hub assembly. Remove the lower ball joint cotter pin, castle nut, and remove the ball joint from the hub assembly. Once the lower control arm is free from the hub assembly, loosen and remove the two 12mm bolts holding the lower control arm to the frame. You can now remove the lower control arm and put it to the side. Remove the upper ball joint cotter pin and loosen the castle nut. You can free the ball joint from the hub assembly. Once free, remove the castle nut and carefully secure the hub assembly with a strap or bungee cord out of the way. Loosen and remove the lower shock mount bolt. Using the ratchet strap, secure the shock up and out of the way if possible. The machine we're performing the installation on has aftermarket shocks, which would not secure in the way that factory shocks would. If you're able to secure your shock with a ratchet strap or bungee cord, it is recommended to do so. Loosen and remove the long 10mm bolt and nut that secures the upper control arm to the frame and remove the upper control arm. Now we need to remove the stock tie rod from the rack and pinion. Using a flathead screwdriver or pry bar, or a wire clippers, carefully cut off the metal band holding the stock inner tie rod boot to the rack and pinion. Be careful not to damage the boot because we will reuse it with our new tie rods. Remove the band and pull the boot out of the way to access the inner tie rod ball socket. Using a large crescent wrench or channel locks, unscrew the inner tie rod from the rack and pinion. Sometimes the retaining clip gets stuck in the rack. Make sure to remove this clip and discard. Unscrew the outer tie rod from the inner tie rod and carefully remove the boot for reuse. If you do damage the boot or need to replace them, you can either order a new OEM replacement boot from your local or online dealer, or go to your local automotive parts store and see if they have a Dorman Universal Rack and Pinion Boot Kit. We're now ready to assemble and install the Texas Tough Customs HD tie rods. The tie rods come in three pieces: the inner tie rod end, the outer tie rod end, and the heavy-duty tie rod itself. The tie rod ends are replaceable parts in case they are damaged. The inner tie rod ends are available from superatv.com or authorized dealers. The outer tie rod end is an automotive part, available from auto parts dealers. Clean the threads on the rack and pinion, as well as the threads on the inner tie rod end. It is recommended to degrease these surfaces with something such as denatured alcohol or a similar degreaser. Apply an appropriate amount of red, high-heat thread locking compound on the threads that go into the rack. Screw the inner tie rod ack into the rack and pinion and make sure it is very tight. Make sure that the jam nut is not installed on the inner tie rod or heim joint. Push your stock tie rod boot onto the shaft of the inner tie rod end. Make sure the boot is properly installed and seated in the groove on the rack and pinion, then secure it tightly with a zip tie. Next, screw on the jam nut, then the new HD tie rod all the way on to the inner tie rod end that we just installed into the rack and pinion. Secure the tie rod assembly out of the way until a later step. Locate the lower control arm for the side of the machine you are working on. Make sure that the ball joint is closer to the front of the machine to ensure that you have the correct arm for the side that you are working on. Install the lower control arm into the lower frame mount using the two factory 12mm bolts and nuts. Snug up, but do not tighten. Your front lower control arms use automotive parts as ball joints. Remember, these are left-hand thread. Later we will adjust the camber, but for now make sure the lower ball joint is screwed in all of the way and then out 3 turns. Remove the cotter pin and castle nut from the lower ball joint and install into the hub assembly. If you're running portals, make sure to assemble with the supplied washers between the castle nut and the portal bracket assembly. Make sure to only tighten the castle nut by hand until installation is complete and desired camber is achieved. Do not install the cotter pin at this time. Locate the upper control arm for the side of the machine that you are working on and make sure that the ball joint is closer to the front of the machine and the shock mount is closer to the rear of the machine. The parts are side specific and they are shown on screen for the correct orientation. Install the upper control arm into the upper frame mount using the factory 10mm by 213mm bolt and nut. Snug up the nut, but do not tighten. The front upper control arms use an automotive part as the upper ball joint. To adjust for proper camber, start with screwing the upper ball joint all the way in and then 3 turns out. Once you finish installation, you may need to adjust the upper ball joint either out or in to achieve the desired camber depending on your shocks and other components. Remove the cotter pin and castle nut from the upper ball joint and install it into the hub assembly. Make sure to only tighten the castle nut hand tight until front installation is complete and desired camber is achieved. Do not install the cotter pin at this time. If you're running portals, make sure to install the thick washer between the castle nut and portal hub assembly. Install the shock into the upper control arm, securing it with the stock 12mm bolt and nut. Install the outer tie rod and tie rod assembly into the hub assembly where the stock tie rod was previously. Once everything is assembled hand tight, go ahead and fully tighten both the upper and lower frame bolts that mount the control arms to the frame. Route and secure the brake line as desired and secure with zip ties. Repeat the installation for the other side of the machine. Reinstall the wheels and you can lower the machine to the ground. It is now recommended to start the machine and perform a short test ride. Go forward and backward, turning the wheels back and forth to allow the shocks to settle to true ride height. After the vehicle has settled to its true ride height, we can now check and make camber adjustments if necessary. We'll start with the rear. Looking at the machine from the rear, if the top of the wheel is sticking out farther than the bottom of the wheel, we need to adjust the upper joints in a few turns. If the bottom of the wheel is sticking out further than the top, then we need to adjust the upper heim joints out. To adjust for camber, we need to jack up the rear of the machine and is recommended to secure with jack stands. Remove the wheels. Remove the upper hub bolt and remove the upper arm from the hub assembly. Once removed, we can adjust the upper heim joints either in or out to achieve the desired camber. Once we've made our adjustments, put the upper arm back into the hub assembly and secure the retaining nut hand tight. We can now reinstall the wheels, start up the machine, and perform a short test ride. Again, pulling it forward and back and turning the wheels back and forth to allow the shocks to settle to true ride height. Repeat these steps until the desired camber is achieved. Once we have achieved our desired camber, tighten all of the hardware. Moving to the front of the machine, we will also have to check the camber as well as the toe adjustment. We'll start with camber. If the top wheel is sticking out further than the bottom wheel, then we will need to adjust the upper ball joint in. If the upper ball joint is all the way in, then we can also unscrew the lower ball joint to accomplish the desired camber. If the bottom of the wheel is sticking out further than the top of the wheel, then we need to adjust the upper ball joint out. Secure the machine, and it is recommended to secure with jack stands and remove the wheels. Remove the castle nut from the upper ball joint and remove the upper ball joint from the hub assembly. Once removed, we can adjust the upper ball joint either in or out to achieve the desired camber. Put the upper ball joint back into the hub assembly and secure the castle nut hand tight. We can now reinstall the wheels, lower the machine, and perform a short test ride. Again, moving forward and back, turning the wheels back and forth to allow the shocks to settle to true ride height. Once the suspension has settled, check to see if you have achieved the desired camber. Repeat these steps until desired camber is achieved. Once desired camber is achieved, we can now tighten all of the ball joint castle nuts and install the cotter pins. Now we want to check the toe adjustment. We need to make sure that the wheels are parallel and they are in alignment to the steering wheel. It is recommended to center the steering wheel, making sure that you are in the center of the travel and the steering wheel is in proper position. If your wheels are pointing outward, then we need to loosen the tie rods to bring the wheels straight. If your wheels are pointing inward, we need to tighten the tie rods to bring the wheels straight. Make sure all the tie rods are screwed in all of the way and the jam nuts are loose. Once desired toe and alignment is reached, we can tighten the jam nuts and make sure to check them frequently. We can now reinstall the wheels, lower the machine, and perform a short test ride. Because the ride height has likely changed with the lift installation, it is now recommended to sit in your machine and make sure that you have maintained visibility. Make any mirror or other adjustments as needed.
Once installation is complete, do a walk around of your machine and verify that all of the hardware is tight. We want to properly torque all of the jam nuts as well as the hardware that secures the arms to the frame. It is also recommended to keep an eye on these while you're riding. Sometimes things can loosen up. To help with this, we highly recommend using witness marks. Using an oil-based paint marker you can make a small line on the hardware between the jam nut and the arm. Then when you're doing your checks, you can have a quick visual reference to see if any hardware has loosened up. And don't worry, if you ever need to redo the witness mark, a little bit of rubbing alcohol will take the paint marker right off and you can reapply. Thank you very much for your purchase of the Texas Tough Customs lift kit. We hope you found this video helpful for the installation of your product on your machine. Also check out the webpage to see what other products are available for a variety of machines. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to the team at Texas Tough Customs. They care strongly about customer satisfaction and want to make sure that you have all the information and questions answered about their products for your machine. Thank you guys very much for watching and have a great day.